I've thought about doing a video discussing my favourite games for as long as I've been YouTubing. This art form has provided some of the most special, engrossing, and flat out entertaining experiences I've ever had over many years and many consoles. Of course I like the idea of celebrating them all in one video. But the challenges of ranking a top 10 alongside the thought I might discover new favourites meant the time never seemed right to finally tackle such a topic. But nowadays, while I still do love gaming, I don't keep up to date on as many new releases as I used to, which means my list of favourites is unlikely to face radical or frequent changes. So now finally seemed like the time to get a version of said list unranked on video. Hello, hi, heyo, sup all you dudes and dudettes, my name is Gnator84 and this is my personal creme de la creme of gaming, presented in the order I first experienced them. Enjoy! Scooby Doo First Frights has felt like the definitive encapsulation of my earliest gaming days ever since enough time passed for it to feel nostalgic. It's funny to think back on my memories of playing the first level for the first time, unaware of how special its nighttime ambiance, comedy, and the way it introduces each character would feel to me all these years later. A quick side note, whilst editing this, I only just realised after 14 years that the opening newspaper foreshadows the third episode. That's such a good detail to be on screen for only a few seconds, and goes to show legit effort and heart was put into this. Now, had I done a video like this much earlier, I would have likely only listed this game and not Spooky Swamp, which always felt like the lesser entry simply because of how underwhelmed I was by the ending, even at 7 years old. But upon revisiting both, I find their pros and cons even them out a lot. First Fright is wonderfully characterful, with great comedic writing and still evocative atmosphere. But I have to admit, while I still do love the simplistic thrills of the villain chases and fights, the main bulk of gameplay, while enjoyable, over-relies on the combat and gets very repetitive. Spooky Swamp really lacks the same charming sense of personality thanks to the whole play as any of the characters any time thing, limiting the dialogue possibilities, but is a lot more fun to play. The greater emphasis on mystery solving and traversal puzzles mixed into the fighting is all very engaging, and taking place in these open environments with tons of different collectibles to find, also aiding greatly separating itself from the LEGO formula First Fright aped. Somewhere in between these two games is the perfect nostalgic title that holds up flawlessly, but even as they are, I can't help but have a humongous soft spot for both of them. I mentioned the LEGO games, which I also loved playing in my early gaming years, but now I do tend to associate my positive feelings of them more with the IPs they were based off. These Scooby Doo games are distinctive in their art style and music to stand out amongst the other iterations of this classic cartoon. I've always loved how expressive the designs for Mystery Inc. are here, whilst having the same entertainment value and smashing up the environments the LEGO games had. I have played far better games than these two that aren't on this list, and I fully acknowledge their flaws, but the fact of the matter is simply looking at these boxes makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. I love how nostalgia makes the silliest, most random things so incredibly special to someone purely because of personal context. Meaning for me, few, if any, games are capable of giving me the same sort of comforting joy that Christmas time does like these two.
Scooby Doo!
And as for something from those early days that does hold up immaculately, oh man, I enjoy a lot of the Mario games, yet there is absolutely no competition against this one being my favorite. I do sometimes wonder if I'd hold the original Galaxy in similar regard had I not played its sequel first, but I still think I'd much prefer the cozy delights of Starship Mario to the needlessly convoluted Comet Observatory, and I just love the total lack of creative restraint 2 has. This has to be one of the most relentlessly imaginative games I've ever played. There isn't a single Galaxy which doesn't offer something unique aesthetically or conceptually, and the mix of side-scrolling platforming with the 3D kind both in linear and open environments really heightens the addictiveness of the variety on offer. The simplicities of the mechanics are utilized in such satisfying, inventive, and increasingly challenging ways that every time I've revisited this game for footage, I always spend a few extra hours caught up in getting more comet medals and stars to progress through the special world. Getting each and every one is fantastic fun, and the vicious difficulty spikes, especially with some of the mini-games, are extremely exhilarating to overcome. And it's all of that accompanied by this sense of majesty and grandeur which makes the game feel like such an adventure and sets it apart from pretty much any other platformer I've played. Much of the credit for that has to go to the music. Now I will try to restrain myself from gushing about the soundtracks for most of the games here because music is such an integral part of media for me, but suffice to say, Mario Galaxy 2 is a prime example as to why hiring an orchestra is one of the best decisions Nintendo has ever made. Every track enhances the magic of this experience tenfold, and it'd already be the most joyous level pack I've ever had the pleasure of playing through. Mario's moveset seems to perfectly match the giddiness I feel playing this game. It's a constant bombardment of pure charm, imagination, and, above all else, fun. It was also, I think, the first game I ever got properly addicted to, because at that point, video games were still nothing more than a hobby for me. Sure, I got excited for a couple, and I've always enjoyed playing them, but it wasn't until an impulsive decision on a summer's day in 2011 where the all-encompassing obsession I have for not just gaming but media in general can be traced back to. My sister had bought Professor Layton and Pandora's Box for our then new DS, a title from a series highly acclaimed by critics and some school friends I had no interest in because solving puzzles seemed boring to me. But for whatever reason, on this particular day, I just thought, I'll give it a try, and was immediately hooked. Amid the whimsy of the art style and world, this series had a certain maturity about it which I hadn't really experienced in gaming up to that point that made it stand out. The gameplay had a much calmer pace about it, and Layton's cool-headed intelligence gave the proceedings a grounded edge that I was really taken by. Factor in the instantly intriguing stories told through high-quality cutscenes plus the addicting diversity of puzzles, and I was quickly obsessed with this series. Spectre's Call was the first game I ever pre-ordered, and by the time the finale Asran Legacy came out during my difficult transition into secondary school, my attachment for the franchise had grown to where the start of the credits reduced me to a sobbing mess like no other piece of entertainment has before or since. And it was the Layton name which got me to pick up my first issue of the official Nintendo magazine, which not only introduced me into the wider world of gaming, but basically set off the chain reaction that got me into YouTubing, analyzing media, film, and my current ambitions for filmmaking and screenwriting. So, as corny as it sounds, my off-the-cuff decision to try a Professor Layton game essentially changed my life. Over the last few years, I've found myself revisiting these games, having forgotten enough of the puzzle solutions for it to feel fresh, and it's been just wonderful to discover they haven't lost any of their magic. I love them all in the Ace Attorney spin-off dearly, but when it comes to picking a favourite, my mind always returns to the one I played first and one of the most personally impactful pieces of art I've experienced. But beyond that obvious asset, I love the use of pre-existing mythology for the narrative hook and journeying with Layton and Luke on the Momentary Express. Fall Sense evokes the eeriest vibes of any location in the series, and the sword fight cutscene at the end is awesome. Something else that struck me when replaying this one is the moment when our heroes wave off Anton and Katya at the end. It made me think about how most of these games aren't Layton's story, it's Layton uncovering a story. Those fantastic dissections of the case he does in every game paints him as a storyteller in a sense, discovering who and what the plot is really about before guiding those supporting roles to a happy end. It gives a greater connection between player and protagonist, but also having the professor usually detached from the emotional side of these mysteries is largely why the ending of Lost Future hits so hard, because we never see him let his guard down quite like it before All Sense. And I gave myself goosebumps just writing that. Professor Layton remains one of my most beloved of all the game series, not least for the personal impact I recognize it had on me, so needless to say, I'm pretty ecstatic about its grand return over a decade after my teary farewell. And speaking of crying at video games, I truly never expected I'd do so again. And then I replayed... I haven't experienced pure escapism quite like I did during my final couple of sessions with this game for footage in a long time. I felt particularly locked into the experience during its climactic battles, so thrilled by them, so utterly riveted despite knowing how it would all play out. And then I got to Fee's farewell scene. Now, I will admit, this was the first of my 4 complete run-throughs of this game where I noticed a lot of her reports are for things which can easily be inferred, and thus did begin to understand how she can be annoying to some. However, I personally remain unbothered by her presence and find her emotionless, blunt nature rather endearing and often funny. But even then, I don't know exactly why, but when she talks about the data of this adventure being her most precious on record, I suddenly thought of all my previous save files and playthroughs throughout the years as that precious data and how precious it is to me. And God, I shed a few tears when Fee said thank you to Link and was overcome with emotion for the entire credits. Skyward Sword has always been an immensely special title for me. It was pretty much the first game I got solely because of O&M's coverage on it, and from there it pretty much defined my taste in gaming. I absolutely love its sense of variety, the bosses are some of the most exhilarating and playful I've ever had the thrill of fighting, plus I'd forgotten enough of the solutions to the dungeons going into this playthrough that I had a treat re-experiencing that oh so satisfying sense of progression through them. But beyond that, this game has always stood out to me for its impeccable sense of character. No NPC feels like they're there purely for set dressing. Everyone is distinct in appearance or personality, and the fact they all have their own little bios from Fee makes the world feel so much more detailed and lively. It really highlights how effective the more focused linear mentality of this game is. The side quests are few, but they feel extra colourful because the motivations are more tangible, and where the locations aren't massive and get revisited throughout, there's plenty of scenarios which present fresh and entertaining dynamics to them, and I love the Metroidvania style of progression when new areas open up. This vibrancy of world building gives the already great story additional impact because you really feel power dynamics shifting and events unfolding even when you're not explicitly a witness to those things. So getting to see a lot of Zelda's journey during the credits is such a beautiful touch, and the time spent developing hers and Link's relationship lends this whole game a romanticism which I absolutely adore. Look, I know full well this game doesn't have the most universally acclaimed reputation, but the fact of the matter is there are emotions Skyward Sword evokes that hit me right in the soul unlike anything else. And I will always find it to be the ultimate summation of everything I loved about gaming when I first played it, and what I'd come to love about so many of these other titles. Inazuma 11, the most invested I've ever been in football. While I have little interest in the sport, I tried the first game out simply because of the sway level 5 had on me at the time thanks to Layton, and I found myself completely addicted to this series alongside the equally entertaining anime adaptation. The original is great, but I've always favoured the sequel more as one of my favourite games, specifically the Firestorm version, simply because it's bigger and better. More locations, more characters and special moves, along with a story that hilariously raises the stakes from the Arkham 11 competing in a tournament to taking on aliens hellbent on world domination through football. As a kid, I never took note of how absurdly seriously this world takes the sport, but it gives this series a very fun campiness nowadays, and it never detracts from the compelling character drama. You really root for this cast both as a team and as individuals when they'd grapple with inner demons or try to master a particular special move before an important match. All that and the mystery surrounding some of them was present in the first, but with most of them already established, the sequel is instantly gripping with more interesting dilemmas at the forefront, especially with Axel's storyline. Him leaving the team partway through was a genuine shock the first time I played it, and the cutscene where he returned hours later was freaking badass. Plus, I loved traveling across Japan on the bus with the team, meeting new players and experiencing their little story arcs. And the RPG styling of the matches worked extremely well with perfectly utilized stylus controls. Guiding the players and the ball whilst taking heed of the opposing team can get quite challenging in a super gratifying way. This is just a great series with the same wonderfully earnest enthusiasm Mark Evans has for the sport. And while I don't have the same sentimentality for the third game and just couldn't get into Go, those first two entries will always have a special place in my heart. And for one final level 5 venture, this game could not have come out at a more perfect time for me. I was at the height of my Professor Layton and Inazuma 11 obsession, and I'd seen enough of Studio Ghibli's work for this collaboration between companies to feel like the most amazing thing. And it was a time where the thought of spending 50, or in the case of my first playthrough, 80 hours with a single game didn't intimidate the crap out of me. So 11-year-old me embraced the RPG time sink in a way I don't think I could today. It was one of the most wonderful gaming experiences I've had. I was basically smitten with it before I even owned it, and because I'm not overly keen on the commitment to the grind this genre necessitates nowadays, it's probably the most invested I'll ever get with an RPG. As someone apathetic to the old school formula, the way the battles here blend the considerate strategy and depth of turn-based combat with faster paced, real-time action is much more appealing to me. Exploiting enemy weaknesses whilst trying to perfectly time defenses and the casting of powerful spells is very exhilarating. Close calls are quite the adrenaline rush. It's a great and very unique modernization of the archetypical JRPG, yet it's the utterly enchanting world surrounding the battle system that I'm most captivated by. I love the imagination and poignancy of the story. The premise immediately resonates with its core simplicity, fitting the fairy tale vibe perfectly, and makes Oliver an easily empathetic and engaging lead. his development into a capable and confident wizard who winds up mending his broken heart by curing others of theirs is very compelling and moving. It's presented so magnificently with those vibrant hand-drawn Ghibli cutscenes and the beautiful job Level 5 did translating that style into 3D. There's something about the running animations in tandem with these lushly drawn environments that makes traversal so uniquely satisfying. And then there's the overworld. Now this may be a bold claim, but I really do think the world map theme may just be my absolute favorite piece of music composed for a video game. Even though you hear it hundreds, if not thousands of times throughout the game, it somehow always hits just as hard as the very first time. It's perfect as this constant reminder of the emotional core of the story and as an accompaniment to navigating this amazing overworld. And that is simply one of the most magical experiences in gaming. The whimsy of the Level 5 and Studio Ghibli combo makes for one of the loveliest, quirkiest, and most heartfelt worlds I've ever had the pleasure of exploring in a video game. And being the sole reason I was desperate to get a PS3 for my birthday that year, it's also an incredibly special title for how it wound up expanding my gaming possibilities with some amazing titles I'll be getting to very soon. But just before we do, it's easy to tell at this point in the list that I mostly enjoy very story-driven or action-packed games, so the more menial kind of escapism found in the Animal Crossing series is something you'd think wouldn't appeal to me. New Leaf, for example, is a game where I spent most of my playtime collecting bugs, fish, and shells to sell in order to pay off my mortgage. Sounds really boring on paper, doesn't it? Yet the relaxed, cozy charm of it all makes it an absolute pleasure to play. While New Horizons did feature some much appreciated quality of life improvements alongside being a valuable asset in lockdown, I found it to be incredibly lacking after the first month or so of building your island, so there's no doubt in my mind that this is the vastly superior game. I love getting the tasks from the villagers. Main Street and Tortimer Island were wonderful additions, and there was more to the multiplayer than just visiting other people's homes. My issue with New Horizons was that it focused way too much on the customization of your island to where there was basically nothing else to do. Meanwhile, New Leaf strikes a great balance between having the customization options for your home and village alongside the life sim aspects, which keeps it addictive. This one really feels like my game. It's my digital home, my delightfully quirky neighbours, and I get to choose how I want to make the most of a session. And with the seasonal events and real-time clock, this is just a really lovely game to pop in when the mood strikes me to see what's going on in my village. Going through the Uncharted series for the first time with my dad was a real thrill. Not only were they the first games I played to be age rated higher than a 12, but also the first games I played to have a properly cinematic feel to them. To put it in context, I was surprised just by how movie-like the way the characters spoke to one another in the first game was. So you can imagine how mind-blowing it was to experience how much further the sequels pushed the envelope of how cinematic a game could be. Yet while I do have tons of great memories from those playthroughs, it wasn't until I revisited the PS3 entries through the Nathan Drake collection after finishing 4 that I truly realized Uncharted was one of my absolute favorite series. These games are a perfect example of why I find greater value in shorter games with replay value akin to that of a movie nowadays. Adventuring through these exotic locales with these amazing characters alongside the addictive blend of gunplay, platforming and puzzles within these compact packages is something I never tire of. I'll be getting to Uncharted 4 later, but in regard to these first three, even though it'd technically be cheating, this bundle would easily be one of my top picks if I could only take a single game with me to a desert island. Now I do wonder sometimes if Drake's Fortune would be as much of a favourite for me as it is now without the PS4 remaster. I'm sure I'd be nostalgic for it, but returning to it with beautiful visuals on par with 2 and 3 makes it easier to appreciate just how much of the series' magic was there from the word go. And what the shooting encounters may lack in smoothness is made up for in how that lends this game an arcadey feel that distinguishes it from the others and makes the repetition of it less of a personal issue. Really, all that's missing from this first entry is the stealth and extravagant set pieces, and when Uncharted 2 included those, the series' formula was pretty much perfected. It greatly diversified the gameplay, upped the scope and extravagance in locations and thus the climbing as well, and made the franchise known for featuring some of the craziest and most awe-inspiring sequences in gaming on an interactive level. Len 3 really nailed the puzzles, being a lot more creative and very Layton-esque, which of course is a very good thing. And while this game's story does have a couple of rough edges, the greater emphasis on Nate and Sully's relationship is really wonderful, the series more than having earned diving a little deeper into the characters at that point. Because above all else, I cannot overstate how much joy I get from the repartee between Nate and company. It's perfectly performed, incredibly witty, and the way information gets dissected sells the enthusiasm for these treasure hunts so well, and elevates these simple stories into riveting epics with real heart. Hell, just editing this and seeing all the different bits of footage has got me itching to revisit these games all over again. And I think that's the best indicator of how phenomenally entertaining I find this series to be. Like apparently a lot of people in 2014, I only knew about this game because YouTubers like Nerdcubed and especially PewDiePie were making videos on it. While said videos made Skate 3 out to be an ironically enjoyable dick-about glitch fest, they got me interested in playing it for myself to find one of the most purely entertaining sandbox games I've played, 100% unironically. I did have a short-lived interest in skateboarding when I was younger, and for as much as this serves as a great endorsement for never picking up a board, gathering immense speed as you ride downhill feels as dangerously exhilarating as it should, and while I do recognize how finicky the flick-it controls can be when a mission requires a specific move to be pulled off, mostly flicking the right stick to pull off a jump feels super satisfying. Mostly, I love finding hills to ride down. Port Carlton not only has a really nice vibe to it, but also tons of great spots to ride down and pull off tricks, especially in the glorious Super Ultra Mega Park. And the career mode with the races, photo and video capturing tasks, and of course the sadistic pleasures of the Hall of Meat mode can be rather addictive to work your way through as well. Skate 3 is one of my go-to games when I'm simply looking to have a bit of fun, because even if I just spend a session skating and messing about in the sandbox, I'm always guaranteed to have a tremendously entertaining time with this game. It's a testament to the greatness of the Arkham series' mechanics that despite the follow-ups greatly expanding upon them, it never feels awkward to return to the simpler versions of the combat and predator encounters found in Asylum. The satisfying fluidity and necessity for playful invention at the core of the punch-ups and stealth's appeal is a blast even in its most basic form, and the momentum Rocksteady achieves in this entry, weaving between the always evolving fighting styles and all the traversal and villain encounters in between, makes for quite the enthralling gameplay experience. What really sets this one apart from the rest of the series though is its particularly gothic tone. The grimy facilities strewn with the dead star feel akin to a horror game, and certain parts were genuinely unnerving during my first playthrough at 12 years old. Hell, those scarecrow sections are so fantastically constructed, I still find them chilling for how they disorient and put Batman in way over his head. Now there's a lot about these games that's easy to take for granted nowadays, like the novelty of detective mode and Batman's suit getting more damaged as you progress, but I've also started to really appreciate what Paul Dini's writing brought to Asylum and City that Origins and Night lacked. I mean, say what you want about City packing in too many villains and whatnot, but he fundamentally understands these characters in a way that allowed Asylum to hit the ground running with a fully fledged and instantly iconic interpretation of this universe. Brought to such spectacular life by all the voice talents, but especially Mark Hamill and the late great Kevin Conroy, as well as the attention to detail for the larger mythos, which also greatly inspired me to properly delve into the Batman movies and shows, and thus made me a real fanatic for this character. So all in all, a fantastic game, but I do prefer City by quite a margin. Just the additions of silkier gliding, quick-fire gadgets and more creative boss fights greatly enhanced the formula to such a high level of entertainment, and that's not even taking into account how invigorating facing off against larger crowds with the amazing soundtrack is. I think the Predator mode got the biggest upgrade from Asylum, with all the extra strategies and tools at your disposal, whilst retaining the claustrophobic level design that keeps the player playing creatively and patiently. A quality which got lost in the subsequent entries, but, if you'll pardon the cliche, really made you feel like Batman without making things too easy. And while I do love the power struggle in the Asylum, there's something about entering Arkham City with much of the dynamics already in play that makes it feel more lived in and exciting. I love witnessing the evolution of the ongoing gang war and discovering all the extra stories found within the riddles, interview tapes and side quests, and the phenomenal atmosphere of it all makes for one of the most captivating, full-blooded environments I've ever experienced in a video game. At every turn, this game showcases why the larger-than-life world of the Dark Knight is so special and intriguing, especially when it comes to the characterization of the messed-up relationship between Batman and the Joker. By all accounts, the death of one of its most notorious criminals is a triumph for Gotham City, yet the moment is treated as anything but. It's mournful, you feel sad for the death of this iconic battle between good and evil, and the ominous drone in the credits as Joker sings "Only You." Such a perfect and momentous scene. It's easily my favorite ending to any video game. A truly unforgettable bookend to what is, as far as I'm concerned, one of the absolute pinnacles of Batman. Help scratch that video game entertainment. Good old Mario Kart, specifically Wii, 7 and 8/Deluxe. These games are just pure fun, with great charm, slick controls, memorable courses, and with the capacity to be viciously challenging in a way that makes it one of my favourite things to play multiplayer. Now I've placed them here in the listing because while Mario Kart Wii was one of the first video games I ever played, 2014 felt like the apex of my obsession with this series, mostly because of 8 and its then upcoming DLC. Something about this series really enraptured my imagination at the time, and I found myself with a greater affection for Wii and 7. I still really enjoy the extra difficulty of the Wii Wheel's precision, and 7's introduction of the underwater and glider sections alongside a few other elements that became mainstays of 8 were a lot of fun. As for 8, I feel like I'd be a lot more willing to call it my favourite if we'd had a follow-up by now, because I am a bit sick of it being the default multiplayer pick, but upon having a few random races on my own for footage, a lot of the love I felt for this series way back when was rekindled. I've always particularly loved how detailed the backgrounds of the tracks are in this game. It makes them feel properly alive. And of course, the addition of a jazz band to the orchestra lends the racing a certain je ne sais quoi, which makes it a thrilling joy. And that's the best way to describe Mario Kart in a nutshell. Even when it frustrates the hell out of you, it remains a total joy. Bully is one of those games I know is one of my favourites, but then I revisit it and realise I've forgotten just how much of a favourite it really is. Within the constrictive nature of its setting comes a playfulness and creativity that makes for a wonderfully unique open world experience. The gamification of the school elements is not only really fun and cleverly implemented, but the way it gives you these select windows to comfortably free roam compels you to spend those moments of free roaming more meaningfully. I love slipping into the routine of heading for the main school building and mulling around while I wait for the classes to start, then heading out and attempting to get as many story missions done as possible before returning to the dorm at the end of the day. This was my first Rockstar game, and what I quickly came to enjoy most about their style is their episodic approach to storytelling, where each mission tends to be a quick standalone caper. It leads to great variety that feels even more special in this game because the backdrop is so ordinary and small scale. Even the seemingly mundane pops in the larger-than-life atmosphere of Bullworth. The quirky stereotypes are extremely entertaining, with the player surrogate Jimmy serving as a straight man to their antics, thus making it all much funnier, and the significant misadventures feel properly exciting when experienced through a 15-year-old's perspective. The tone of Bully constantly surprises and delights, and I'm always left so giddy playing it. Something I love about Naughty Dog's games from The Last of Us onward is their main menus. So simple yet so evocative, the feelings they instill linger throughout the entire experience. After 3 games of Nate's theme triumphantly greeting you to a new adventure, Uncharted 4's musicless opening image of this dead pirate leaves quite the foreboding impression. I remember playing through the sections in workaday locales like the orphanage or Nate's home my first time through, and having the atmosphere of that scene stay with me throughout. It cements the feeling of this lost city lying in wait for its dark, decayed heart to be discovered for hundreds of years. A perfect scene setter for a very different Uncharted. Not only are all the new additions to the gameplay like the whip and sliding terrific fun, they add a versatility to the level design which makes the more dynamic stealth and shootouts here absolutely amazing. The way you can go from sneaking around to guns a-blazing back to being undetected feels thrillingly organic. Plus, this was the only Uncharted I ever got to play multiplayer on, and the silky smooth mechanics made it a really fun one. But back to the main campaign, the inclusion of The Last of Us's optional conversations and collectible notes adds so much to not only the characters and exploration, but the journey to and the past turmoil within Libertalia. Spending half of the experience there isn't just a nice homage to 1, but allows you to really take in the backstory of this fallen paradise, as the visuals and characters piecing together the events paint such a vivid picture. It's one of my favourite aspects of the whole story, along with the greater character complexity also stemming from The Last of Us, I'd imagine. For as breathtaking as the Madagascar chase is, I think the standout moment of the entire game is Nate and Elena's quiet drive amid their marital tensions. It says so much without saying a thing, letting you take in the weight of everything you've gone through with these two across the entire series. And where a lot of us went into this game with expectations that one of the main characters would die, I'll never forget how I instantly focused on Elena not moving in this scene, and being completely in sync with everything Nate goes through in that moment.
You realize we're now even for everything I've ever pulled, right? Yeah, like ever.
No, not by a long shot.
It's one of those bits that serves as a portrait of how much I'd grown attached to these characters. Truly one of the most lovable casts I've seen in anything, to be honest. And what a wonderful send-off they got with this game. Oh yeah, maybe Ni no Kuni's world map theme does have some competition for the title of my favourite piece of video game music. I mean, I'm pretty sure LA Noire's soundtrack single-handedly gave me a love of jazz, and that full 9-minute version of the main theme especially is such a perfect and gorgeous mood setter for a game with an incredible sense of mood. I love how it depicts 40s Los Angeles as harboring a grim and corrupt heart under the guise of this post-war paradise, having you investigate many of the most harrowing crimes under a bright blue sunny sky. And while the game's ambition does lead to some clunky storytelling within the overarching narrative, I do at least admire the attempt it makes at an all-encompassing impression of the genre, and the stories within the individual cases I find utterly engrossing, even on repeat playthroughs. What makes the mystery genre so enjoyable for me is how its inherent nature instantly leaves you more attentive to events, and the way this game translates that to an interactive medium turns the storytelling and performances into as much a gameplay mechanic as the driving or shooting. It makes for an incredibly unique gaming experience. The methodical pace is so absorbing to me, and I'm always properly compelled analysing what the suspects say and how they act when saying it before really mulling over how to respond. There really is nothing quite like nailing the interrogations to unravel more of the case. God damn, does that sound invigorating! Above all else though, every time I revisit this game, I'm reminded of what a truly indelible impression the atmosphere and aesthetics left on me. Not only is LA Noire one of the main influences on one of my dream movies, along with Professor Layton and Magnum P.I., but anytime I hear the music or see the vehicles and fashions of the era, my mind always thinks it LA Noire-esque. And perhaps that's the biggest compliment I can give this game. I love it so much, it's basically become a noun for me. It's interesting that my two favourite Zelda games not only have completely contrasting design philosophies, but Skyward Sword was actively being moved away from with Breath of the Wild. And yet I love both games almost equally because they both feature the same tremendous spirit of charm and adventure. They just achieve it in very different ways. From the moment this game starts, about 70 to 80% of the story has already happened, and soon after you pretty much know the bare essentials of what went down 100 years ago. The main missions as a result are a quest for deeper context to make the final march to the castle more meaningful. And while it took me a very long time to find it, Zelda's diary within Hyrule Castle imbues the seemingly simple narrative with a riveting sense of tragedy. That final line chilled me to the bone when I first read it. And taking on the Divine Beasts offer more focused and varied gameplay sections, while seeking out past memories encourages thorough exploration of Hyrule. And I love how said exploration before unlocking enough fast travel options can feel like a proper adventure in and of itself, having to climb, adapt to weather conditions and battle enemies along the way, whilst getting distracted by shrines and other points of interest. Few things in an open world game are as magical as hearing that accordion play in the distance and knowing Cass is close by. It's amazing too how even after hundreds of hours of playing it, Breath of the Wild still has the capacity to surprise me with little areas and even side content I never came across before. And even if I pop it in for only a couple minutes, I always get swept up in the sheer splendor of open world Hyrule. Jumping ahead to 2019 now, which was a year I made very few videos. This is for a few reasons, but the chief one being I spent most of that year in my biggest gaming slump to date. I still played and enjoyed some, but nothing was properly invigorating my love for the art form like it used to. And it really did feel like for a while that my best gaming days were behind me, and I'd never get to experience the thrill of falling in love with a video game for the first time again. Then in October, The Last of Us was one of the 2 free monthly games on PlayStation Plus. Despite its horror overtones, it is surprising I let it pass me by for so long given my love for the Uncharted series, but seeing it there readily available finally gave me the impetus to check it out. And I think you can probably tell where I'm going with this, so I'll cut to the chase. I had an inkling I was playing something special when I realized I kept checking to make sure companions were following close behind, and even before I hit the credits, I knew this was the game I'd been yearning for to remind me why I fell in love with this art form in the first place. What Naughty Dog particularly excel at is unifying the gameplay, story, and presentation in a way which makes for some of the most investing experiences in the medium. But where Uncharted blended those elements together to make for rip-roaring adventures, The Last of Us beautifully uses the tension of the survival mechanics to bolster the power of the narrative. To have to really scour the environments for whatever resources you can find immerses you right into the character's situation. And often finding yourself with limited ammo and health packs greatly heightens the need for stealth to preserve those things, which, having to think on the fly and often recklessly use up those things, greatly heightens the suspense of these encounters. That and a lot of the collectible notes, as I touched on with Uncharted 4, portray what a dark and uncompromising world this is, which makes the central relationship seem all the more fragile and precious and touching. I love how thematically tight this narrative is, every character serving as a case for and against Joel's final decision, whilst being compelling presences in their own right. Everything leads towards the culmination so spectacularly that playing ruthlessly as Joel, killing the Fireflies and that doctor who I'm sure wasn't anyone important, only to see him suddenly turn into this frightened father figure, potentially dooming humanity out of pure love in a direct mirror to the opening. Oh my god, it's got to be one of the most moving moments in video game history. The Last of Us is a game of overwhelming emotion, intensity, and beauty, and experiencing it at the time I did was a very special experience. Now, if The Last of Us was the game that rekindled my love for gaming, then GTA 5 was the one to cement it for good. This is a game I felt very familiar with long before I owned it myself. I remember going around a friend's house in 2013 when I still wasn't allowed to play grown-up games and having my mind blown watching him play GTA Online. It completely threw my preconception of these games being nothing but sex and murder out the window. There was this cool world to explore with all sorts of awesome things to do in it. But my parents remained vigilant about not letting me play it over many years of asking. Too many hours of watching YouTube content on it, especially Little and Cute. Now I will say, had I been allowed to play it before I turned 18, I do think a lot of the satire of the single player would have been lost on me. So in hindsight, having now poured many hours into it, I do think my parents were right in holding off. Plus, my 18th birthday coincided with the UK going into lockdown in 2020. So alongside New Horizons, this served as a great bit of escapism in the early days of an unexpectedly difficult period. And since then, this has gotten up there with Skate 3 and Breath of the Wild as one of the easiest sandbox games to pick up whenever I'm just looking to have some fun. There's an arcade-like simplicity to the mechanics that makes the shooting uber satisfying, and cruising around the city feels great, even if I'm not exactly the best driver. Because of the content I watched of this game, I was mainly interested in the online when I finally got my hands on it. So while I'd probably be sick of it by now had I played this way back when, a la Mario Kart 8, GTA Online remains my main way of free roaming this world, and I still love killing time with a few rounds of the death matches and the other jobs. I didn't even give the single player much thought when I first started playing, but after a few weeks I decided to properly check it out, and given my feelings towards some of their other games, I wasn't too surprised by how quickly I got into it. Rockstar's episodic storytelling continues to fit the open world mold so well, especially with the three main characters and their different dynamics with each other and the other vivid personalities. And like a lot of these Rockstar games, it's the little standalone adventures that I find most special about the story. It leads to a lot of variety in the mission design and also makes the bigger moments in the narrative, like the heists, feel a lot more impactful when mixed in with these smaller capers. Los Santos is such a vibrant world with a breadth of tone and activity within that continues to surprise and entertain. So while it's easy to bemoan how this game and Mario Kart 8 have stuck around these past couple of generations without follow-ups, I really don't think it's hard to understand why they've endured the way they have. And those are my favorite games. You know, it's crazy to think 2024 marks 10 years of me posting YouTube videos. While I didn't start making this video with that in mind, I can't think of a more fitting topic to commemorate this past decade of content creation. And while I've not been able to accumulate much of a following in that time, I still love making these videos. I've met some amazing people through it, and I've found myself able to appreciate many of the games covered here and elsewhere on a deeper level. And I really am grateful to anyone who took a few minutes out of their day to take a look at something I made. This video has been one of my biggest creative endeavors on this platform, so if you made it this far, truly, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed.